The pillar was marble, veined like a forearm, and it blocked exactly half the altar. From my seat, row 12, far right, last chair before the service cart, Rebecca looked like a bride in a postcard with a thumb over the edge. The Colorado afternoon poured through the hillside chapel's glass like new honey. Somewhere, eucalyptus in the florals threaded a clean scent through the air. Somewhere else, an HVAC unit coughed the small, artificial chill of money. My seating card said, Elizabeth Carter in elegant serif, but someone had softened the sting by adding +1 in faint pencil, as if hope required parentheses. I set the card back on the cushion beside my clutch, the way you set a dressing on a wound and tell it to behave. On the other side of the aisle, our parents sat in row 2, Thomas straight as a bayonet. Susan's hand looped through his arm like a ceasefire. They didn't look back. Rebecca's veil floated as the string quartet found its practiced ache. My sister glowed in the way women glow when a room agrees with them. She had always fit the family frame better than I did. Achievement, tradition, legacy, that was our Carter crest. They were verbs in Rebecca's mouth, nouns in Thomas's, and a list of conditions in mine. Behind my pillar, a caterer whispered into a mic, "We're 2 minutes to vows." The radio crackled. The smell of champagne settled somewhere between all the eucalyptus and whatever flowers Instagram had told them to order. I touched the small velvet pouch in my clutch. The metals inside were warm from my hands. I wasn't supposed to bring them. "Dress for calm," Mom had texted 3 nights ago. "Let the day be about your sister." She meant well. Moms often do, and they plot a truce they didn't earn. I wore navy, a simple dress that remembered the grit of a uniform without imitating it. My hair was pinned quietly. My shoes could carry me fast. From where I sat, I could see Rebecca's profile when the officiant turned the book. I could also see the back of a floral arrangement so large it cast weather. The pillar and the peonies conspired, the family's 2 favorite ways to obscure. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant said, "we gather to—" A hand touched my shoulder. It wasn't Thomas's. Too light. Not Susan's. Too sure. I turned and found a face built from lines and decisions. The same steel blue eyes I'd learned to trust in Kabul, Ramadi, and the one base no one writes about. He looked absurd in a wedding pew, and exactly right anywhere a person might need to stand. "Colonel Harlan," I said, throat thinner than planned. "Captain Carter," he answered, voice low, amused at the theater, respectful of the ritual. He wore a suit so sharply pressed it might have come with rules. The scent of his aftershave, cedar and something older, cut the floral sweetness in a single disciplined line. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. "Paying my respects," he said, "and correcting a seating error." "I'm fine," I lied. The pillar disagreed. He glanced at the card, at the parentheses. His mouth twitched once, a veteran's version of a smile. "Come with me," he said, as if telling me to take the right flank. "I can't," I said, automatic. "It's Rebecca's show." He shifted to the aisle without waiting. "Then let's give her the whole audience." The quartet softened to a hush as the vows approached. I should have refused. I had practiced refusing all my life, politely, efficiently, without blood. But the colonel's hand had that quiet gravity I remembered from a night convoy when the road vanished and only someone else's certainty kept us from falling into it. I stood before I could rationalize a crouch. We moved like people late for mass. Careful, small, unobstructive. He turned down the central aisle, not the side. Heads swiveled by instinct. The air picked up the motor of whisper. I felt every eye like a weight, and beneath it, the peculiar lightness of a person stepping into a hallway that is finally hers. In row 3, my father's jaw set. 2 teeth met in a way that meant words weren't safe yet. My mother's hand pressed his forearm. Her eyes slipped to mine and held 1 second longer than habit allowed. The colonel stopped at the end of row 1 and tipped his head toward the empty spot behind it, reserved for someone titled Efficient Assistant who had decided not to exist. "Sit," he said, as if adjusting a formation. He took the aisle end, letting me disappear a little less. Up front, the officiant cleared his throat, flustered, as if protocol had mislaid a page. Rebecca blinked. The ring-bearer yawned. The eucalyptus believed in itself. "You didn't have to do that," I murmured. "Wrong," he said. "I had orders." He kept his eyes forward. From the part of me that hates to see good soldiers hidden behind furniture. The word hidden found my sternum like a thumbprint. The metals in my clutch shifted, as if metal could bristle. Somewhere to my left, a family friend, I think Gregory Allen, who always noticed how a room was cruel, tipped me the smallest nod. It felt like a receipt. The officiant resumed, voice searching for its place. "Do you, Rebecca, take—" The colonel leaned half an inch. "Breathe," he said. "You're not under fire." "You never saw my family at Christmas," I muttered. He huffed once, a laugh with rank. When the kiss came, people stood, the way they do when instructed by an invisible choir. The quartet swelled. The room exhaled into applause. I clapped twice, then let my hands fall. Through the glamour, Rebecca's eyes found me. Something moved in her face. Not anger, not delight. Recognition's younger, clumsier cousin. Recessionals have choreography, this one did too. The couple swept down the aisle, petals fell. A videographer in a vest learned the science of walking backward. As they passed, the colonel's hand lifted to a precise half salute, not seen by most, meant for one. Rebecca's mouth pinched, then softened, and because she has always been braver than Thomas about feelings, she nodded back. The nod said, "I see you. The rest of it could wait." Outside, bells tried to be antique. The hillside wind smelled of sage and dry stone. People poured themselves into light the way a wedding asked them to. The colonel prepared to go to ground, his phrase for entering a reception like a reconnaissance, not a party. "You look like you're planning a raid," I said. "I'm planning to sit," he replied. "First row, front table, you with me." "You can't just—" "Captain," he said, "I can do whatever my conscience orders, provided it maintains the peace." He smoothed his tie. "Besides, it's my day too." "How do you figure?" I asked. He glanced at me sidelong. "I brought my finest officer to the dance." The line landed without flourish. I felt ridiculous for wanting to cry and a little angry at the pillar for not following me out to take the blame. At the reception ballroom, a glass box with a view of a mountain pretending to be eternal, we met the seating chart. A brushed plexiglass slab with calligraphic flourish listed tables like ranks. At head table, 8 names in gold script: Rebecca, her new husband, his parents, Thomas and Susan, 2 important uncles. Under table 1, Colonel William Harlan plus guest. Under table 12, near the kitchen door, Elizabeth Carter. The colonel's hand did not touch the chart. He did not need to. He intercepted an event planner with a headset orbiting her skull like a satellite. "We have a correction," he said, tone generous and final. "Captain Carter is with me." The planner blinked, tripped through her mental index. Donor, general, problem. She looked from his face to mine to the tidy stack of medals visible for the first time in the open pouch of my clutch. She recalibrated in 2 seconds flat. "Of course," she said. "We'll make it right." In the ballroom, the good silver chimed under the test clink of glassware. The champagne smelled like something a person buys when they're afraid of silence. My father stood by a window, chewing the view like it might go down easier than the situation. Mom made a small beeline that looked accidental to everyone except me. "Hello, Colonel," she said, warm with relief as if he'd just landed a helicopter in our yard. "You found her." "I didn't have to look far," he answered. "Someone put her where pillars grow." Mom's gaze flicked to me. "You okay?" "I'm better," I said, for the first time in a long time. The colonel steered us to table 1, paused just enough to let the room register the reassignment, and pulled out a chair. He waited for me to sit before he did. Glasses trembled on their stems as people swapped gossip mid-sip. Gregory Allen materialized on my other side with that quiet competence of men who hold chairs and grudges at the same time. The MC tapped a mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats." Colonel Harlan's voice dropped, just for me. "We're not here to pick a fight," he said. "I know," I answered. "We're here to stop one." Good, he replied. Then when the toasts begin, let me do the talking. My father turned then, finally, fully. He took us in, the two of us at table one, the metals peaking like small suns, the room's axis resisting a gentle, undeniable tilt. His pride rose in his posture, then faltered as if unsure which side it was on. He opened his mouth. The MC raised the mic. To begin our evening, a welcome from the family. I folded my napkin across my lap with the same care I once used for maps. My heartbeat slowed to the old cadence I trusted. Assess, breathe, move. The colonel's hand settled on the table, inches from mine, steady as a paperweight. The room stilled. The mountain did its silent, eternal trick outside, and for the first time in my life, I did not plan to duck. I planned to be seen. Long before the pillar blocked my view, I learned how families build their own architecture. Ours favored marble, cold, polished, load-bearing. Beauty with weight, beauty with rules. Growing up, the Carter house in Colorado Springs always smelled faintly of pine polish and ambition. My father kept awards in glass cases. My mother kept schedules with the precision of a quartermaster. Rebecca fit right into that rhythm. Valedictorian, tennis captain, flawless posture even at breakfast. She could win without trying and apologize without meaning it. She came out of the womb already framed for the mantle. I was the second draft. I joined the Marines at 19 because something in me needed noise louder than expectations. My father called it rebellion. My mother called it a phase dressed like patriotism. Rebecca sent me a reasonable card. Proud of you, don't make us worry too much. I carried it in my duffel until Kandahar turned the ink into a watercolor. For years, holidays were video calls where I could hear plates clinking in the background. Thanksgiving was always the same. Dad carving the turkey, Rebecca announcing a new promotion, Mom laughing too brightly, and me, pixelated in camouflage, a guest in my own bloodline. When I earned my captain bars, I emailed a photo to the family group chat. Rebecca sent confetti emojis. Mom sent hearts. Dad didn't reply, not even seen. My commanding officer, then Major Harlan, was the one who slapped my back hard enough to crack pride loose from something old in my ribs. He said, "Some victories aren't meant for your childhood home." I pretended I didn't understand. I understood perfectly. Homecomings were always polite. Rebecca would hug me with the careful warmth you reserve for a favorite teacher, not a sibling. Mom would bustle with casseroles like comfort was a chore. Dad would eye my uniform and ask questions shaped like disapproval. Still planning to make a career of this? Couldn't you do something safer? Rebecca's firm is expanding, you know. Once at a New Year's dinner, a distant cousin asked, "Elizabeth, are you still in the forces?" Dad corrected him. "She's between postings." I was 2 weeks from deployment. My place at family gatherings was always the edge. The folding chair, the kids' table when I was 23, the couch arm when they ran out of proper seating. I wasn't unwelcome, I just wasn't central. The house had a gravity, and I didn't orbit correctly. Rebecca never meant harm, she was just made of the same material as our parents. Polished, ambitious, adorned. I loved her anyway, the way you love a person who doesn't always remember to look sideways. When I retired at 36, medically quietly with a knee that forecast storms better than any weatherman, my family staged a welcome home dinner. It wasn't malicious, it just wasn't about me. Rebecca's engagement dominated the night, her ring, her venue, her future. I had just left the only world that ever made sense, and my parents acted like I'd returned from a semester abroad. A week later, I moved to a small apartment in Denver and learned to live with silence. No roll call, no briefing, no brothers in arms. The medals went into a velvet pouch. The uniform went into a garment bag. My life went into a container labeled later. Colonel then led to Colwyn's. Harlan stayed in touch. A text, a check-in, a strange holiday card with a cartoon eagle saluting. He didn't say it, but I knew he understood the ache of stepping out of service and into a world that claps for the wrong things. Last year, when Rebecca announced her wedding, the invitation arrived addressed to Elizabeth Carter plus guest, optional. Like that was my story. Optional. My seating placement came digitally. Row 12, seat Q. The map showed a tiny icon behind a structural support beam. I laughed because the alternative was throwing my phone. Mom called later to justify it. Honey, they had to make room for the donor families, you understand. And Rebecca thought you'd be more comfortable back there. Comfortable. Invisible is comfortable, if you're not the one living in it. The night before the wedding, my father sent a text I wasn't meant to misread. Please be respectful tomorrow. This day is important for your sister. As if I wasn't capable of decorum. As if I hadn't spent half my life executing decorum under fire. I replied, understood. The Marines teach compliance when emotion doesn't serve. On the morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of my mirror fastening a simple necklace, no rank. My knee ached from the cold front. The air smelled like rain and memory. I considered wearing my uniform, then heard Dad's imagined scoff, Rebecca's polite wince, Mom's smoothing tone. I wore the quiet dress. At the chapel, a young usher with hair too perfect smiled blankly and said, "Row 12 is on the right, ma'am." He didn't look at my face long enough to see anything else. The pillar greeted me like an old adversary. I sat. I folded my hands. I swallowed the old ache. I remembered the first time I was pushed out of a family photo because it's just siblings in this one. I remembered Dad bragging about Rebecca's scholarship while ignoring my deployment orders. I remembered my medals lighting the sand under a foreign sun while my seat at Thanksgiving cooled, untouched. And then, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in months. A voice with gravel at the bottom and command at the top. A voice that had pulled men out of fire. Captain Carter! I turned. Colonel William Harlan, in a suit, medals pinned with precision. Eyes sharp as they'd been in the desert, stood in the aisle as if summoned by something older than duty. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. "You're in the wrong place," he said. His gaze flicked to my seating card, to the pillar, to me, unimpressed, unamused, protective. "I'm fine," I lied. "No," he said simply. "Not today." "What does that mean?" He extended one hand, not a command, not a request, something in between, something exact. "Come with me." The eucalyptus stirred in the air conditioning. Rebecca turned her head as if she sensed a shift in the room. The quartet paused between chords, and for the first time at a family event, someone stood for me, not to correct me, not to compare me, but to bring me forward. That was the moment the wedding became something else entirely. That was the moment I realized the story I'd carried all my life, unseen, unranked, uninvited, was about to be rewritten in front of everyone. For once, the room would have to look at me without the pillar. And I was done hiding. The reception ballroom shimmered, the way wealth does when it wants to apologize for nothing. Crystal chandeliers trembled with the air conditioning. Round tables staged themselves like regiments in formation. The mountain sunset painted its last gold across the glass walls in slow, theatrical strokes. Someone had spent an unholy amount of money to make the evening look effortless. Colonel Harlan and I walked in together. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it rearranged the air. People turned. They always do when a man with posture like a commandment enters a room. And they turned again when they realized who he was escorting. Me, the girl who usually hovered near the buffet tables and escaped early. My father's face went the color of cooling steel. My mother blinked once as if she'd lost her footing on a moral stair. Rebecca, halfway through hugging an aunt, froze mid-embrace. The event coordinator rushed toward us. "Colonel Harlan, Captain Carter, your seats?" She glanced at her iPad, panicked. Table 12 glared back at her like a clerical sin. "The captain is with me," the colonel said, voice gentle but unnegotiable. "Front table." The coordinator nodded fast enough to injure herself. Two staffers scrambled, sliding chairs like they were rerouting history. A few guests murmured. Recognition rippled. Some people stand out in a crowd because they demand attention. Others because they've earned it somewhere far away where attention gets you killed. Colonel Harlan belonged to the second category. He pulled out my chair at the head table. "Sit, Captain." I sat, and the room saw me. My father approached, tall, rigid, jaw set like a locked gate. "Elizabeth," he said, voice tight. "Can we speak privately?" "No," the colonel answered before I could. "Not right now." Dad's eyes sharpened. "Colonel, with respect, this is a family matter." "It involves my officer," Harlan replied. "So it's mine too." A hush cracked across the surrounding tables. Dad realized the entire front section was listening, and his spine ratcheted straighter. "This is Rebecca's wedding," he said. "We don't want attention pulled from her." "Then perhaps you shouldn't have placed your daughter in the shadows," the colonel said. "People notice absence, especially when it's deliberate." Dad looked at me. "You think we did this on purpose?" I held his gaze. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. "You've been doing it on purpose my whole life." He flinched, not visibly, but in the minute shift of a man hit somewhere he kept unarmored. Mom hurried over, smoothing her dress in the moment. "Let's all sit, please. Let's not make a scene." Colonel Harlan gave a polite smile, cold, precise, surgical. "Ma'am, the scene was made when your daughter was placed behind a pillar." And just like that, the confrontation dissolved. Not by shouting, but by truth spoken plainly in a room that never expected to hear it. My father retreated. My mother followed. And the colonel sat beside me, elbows relaxed, presence like a wall that moved to let me breathe. "Why did you come?" I asked him softly. He didn't answer immediately. He watched the newlyweds pose for photos, the photographer barking cheerful orders, the guests buzzing in excited little hives. Then he said, "I heard you were meant for row 12, behind a structural obstruction. You didn't have to fix that." He gave a small exhale, almost a laugh. "Captain, you served 12 years, carried men on your shoulders, held lines no one else could steady, and your own family tried to hide you behind architecture." He angled his head toward me. I wasn't going to let that stand. A warmth rose in my chest, unfamiliar and heavy. "When did you get sentimental?" I asked. "I'm retired," he said. "I'm allowed one feeling per quarter." I snorted. "You just used it." "Worth it." When dinner service began, murmurs traveled like wind through wheat. Guests leaned into their partners, whispering versions of, "Is that the Colonel Harlan? The Elizabeth Carter? Wasn't she the one who... What's she doing up front? Who moved the seating? Since when is she important enough?" The chatter swirled, but beneath it, something else shifted. Curiosity, gravity, the subtle rearrangement of social hierarchy. For the first time in my life, it wasn't Rebecca drawing the orbit. It was me. Gregory Allen, a longtime family friend, quiet, observant, leaned over from the next seat. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "it's good to see you here. Really here." I nodded. Gregory had always seen what others ignored. That was his gift, and maybe his burden. "You look like someone who finally took her rightful place," he said. My eyes pricked. "Not sure about rightful." "Then I'll say earned," he replied, "because that much is undeniable." Rebecca approached the table then, still luminous, still bride beautiful, but her confidence flickered when she saw the colonel beside me. "Liz," she said, voice softer than expected, "why didn't you tell me you invited him?" "I didn't," I said. She blinked at the colonel. "Sir, thank you for being here, but..." "Captain Carter deserves to be seated where her service is respected," he said. "And you deserve to know the truth about your sister." "Truth?" she repeated. Her expression was unfamiliar. Not jealousy, not annoyance. Curiosity. Maybe even embarrassment. Before she could ask more, the MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our toasts." The ballroom dimmed slightly, candles flickered. The colonel straightened, jacket immaculate, posture carved from something that didn't break. "I should warn you," he murmured. "I plan on saying something tonight." My stomach tightened. "Colonel, it's time the room heard the right story," he said. The MC introduced the father of the bride. My dad rose, clearing his throat, preparing the speech he'd rehearsed for weeks. But all I could hear was the shift, the subtle turning of heads, the breathless expectancy, the awareness that a reckoning sat at table one. The colonel's presence had changed the wedding's gravity, and every person here could feel it. He leaned close once more, as if reading my pulse. "Captain Carter," he said, soft enough for only me. "We're not here to start a battle." I nodded. "We're here," he continued, "to finish one." He lifted his champagne glass, gaze fixed ahead. The room fell into a hush that felt like the second before a salute. Dad began his speech, but everyone, absolutely everyone, kept glancing at the man beside me, waiting for what came next, waiting for the moment this wedding would stop being polished, predictable family theater and become the night the invisible daughter stepped out of the shadows for good. And that was when the air tightened, when every muscle in my body learned a new kind of readiness, when I knew, in a room full of flowers, speeches, and curated perfection, that my story was finally about to be spoken aloud. The ballroom lights dimmed just enough to turn every champagne flute into a small lantern. Dad stood at the mic, tie straight, posture rigid, smile strained into something polite and rehearsed. He cleared his throat. A thunderous, unnecessary sound in a room already silent. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate Rebecca, our star achiever, our pride, our—" He glanced toward table one. His eyes snagged on the colonel beside me. On me, sitting where he never meant me to sit. On the medals peeking from my clutch like contraband dignity. His voice faltered. Mom reached for his arm, urging him gently to continue. He composed himself. Barely. "Rebecca has always—" A pause. A swallow. "Made us proud." There it was. The line he had delivered my whole life without variation. The unspoken counterpoint. Elizabeth hasn't. The colonel set down his glass with a click that traveled like a warning across linen. Dad recovered, forcing warmth back into his tone. "And Daniel, we welcome you to the family." It should have been a smooth landing. But truth has terrible manners when it's been kept outside too long. Because at that exact moment, a server approached our table with a tray of champagne, and instead of addressing the bride and groom, she made the instinctive, whisper-soft mistake of addressing the colonel. "Sir, would you like to begin the honors?" She didn't know him. She didn't know me. She simply recognized presence. Dad froze. The colonel stared at the glass, at the server, at the room, then stood. Slow, deliberate, a rising pillar of certainty. "Colonel," Dad said sharply, this is not—" "Mr. Carter," the colonel replied, tone clean and calm. "I believe this room has one more toast to hear." Rebecca's face tightened, confusion laced with nerves. Mom whispered, "Please don't make this—" But the colonel had already stepped forward. He didn't go to the mic. He didn't need one. When he spoke, the ballroom obeyed. "I'd like to honor someone tonight," he began. "Someone this family has placed in the shadows for far too long." My lungs constricted. He continued, each word landing with the certainty of a boot on desert ground. "This Marine served 12 years, 2 tours in combat, countless operations most of you will never hear about because real service doesn't come with hashtags or speeches." He glanced at me, not for permission, but acknowledgement. This Marine carried wounded men through gunfire. She held lines her commanders feared would collapse. She was the steady voice in the ear of soldiers who didn't think they'd live till morning. Guests shifted, murmured, recalibrated. Someone gasped softly. "Rebecca's maid of honor, maybe." Dad stared at the colonel like a man watching a house he built tilt on its foundation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the colonel said, raising his glass, "I propose a toast to Captain Elizabeth Carter." My name struck the air like a flare. "Captain Carter," he continued, "deserves a seat far closer than row 12, and far more respect than the shadows she was placed in." Silence. Then, like wind lifting a sheet, people rose, one table, then another, then all. A full, stunned, reverent stand. Chairs scraped backward. Crystal chimed. Breath caught in a dozen chests at once. The orchestra stopped playing mid-note. Someone applauded first, Gregory Allen. Then others joined until the room thundered like artillery, but warmer, human, sincere, and I sat frozen. Not because I was ungrateful, not because I didn't understand what he was doing, but because standing has always been easier for me than being seen. The colonel lifted his glass toward me. "To the bravest Marine I ever commanded," he said quietly. "And the most invisible daughter who deserves visibility now." The applause rose again, fuller, sharper, truer. Rebecca's lip trembled, mascara threatening mutiny. Mom covered her mouth, tears spilling through her fingers. Dad, my father, went pale, as truth knocked the breath from him. When the colonel finally sat, he placed his hand over mine, not possessively, not triumphantly, just steadily. "You're allowed to stand now," he said. I rose. The applause became something else. Not thunder, not noise, but witness. For the first time in 37 years, my family saw me without the pillar, without the excuses, without the diminished seating. They saw the daughter who had fought for a country that had never once told her to sit in row 12. Dad approached the table after the applause softened. I prepared for anger. But what reached me wasn't anger. It was regret. He stood beside me, hands trembling slightly, something I'd only seen once before, the day I shipped out. "Elizabeth," he said hoarsely, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said softly. His jaw worked, words trapped behind decades of pride. When he finally spoke, his voice broke on the truth. "I thought..." Rebecca's path was the one that made sense, the safe one, the respectable one. "And mine wasn't respectable?" I asked. He winced like I'd struck him. "No, I mean..." He swallowed. "I didn't understand your world. And I didn't want to lose you to it." "You almost lost me because of how you treated me," I said. Not loud, not cruel, just factual. He closed his eyes, pain passing like a shadow across his face. When he opened them, they were wet. My father rarely cried. He didn't cry at funerals. He didn't cry when I deployed. But he cried now. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words stumbled out, raw and uneven. "I'm so damn sorry, Elizabeth." I exhaled. Not victory, not vindication. Something gentler, something like permission. "You don't get a medal for apologizing," I said quietly. "I know." His voice trembled. But I needed to say it anyway. I nodded once. "We'll talk later, when the night isn't made of glass." He nodded back, relieved and wrecked. Mom embraced me without words. Rebecca hugged me next, tight and trembling, whispering, "I didn't know how much we hurt you." "It's done," I murmured. "Let's not repeat it." She held my hand as the next dance began, and the colonel stepped away, giving us space. But not before he squeezed my shoulder once, a silent salute. A reminder that some families are built on blood, and some are built on the battlefield. When the orchestra began a slow, warm instrumental, the colonel returned to my side with a wry half-smile. "You realize," he said, "that tonight will be retold in this family for generations." "I know," I said, "and for once I'm okay with being in the story." "You didn't need me to make that happen," he said. "Maybe not," I replied, "but it helped that someone finally stood for me." He raised a brow. "Captain, you've been standing for yourself your whole life." I just moved a chair. The mountain sunset faded into dusk outside the glass walls. The scent of champagne and warm garden air drifted in through a cracked door. The ballroom lights glowed softer, like the room had exhaled. For the first time at a family event, I felt not tolerated, but present. Not incidental, but central. Not hidden, but seen. And the night, still tender, still fragile, waited for whatever came next. The ballroom air grew thick with celebration again, music swelling, glasses clinking, people drifting back into the rhythm of a wedding they would never forget for reasons Rebecca never planned. Candlelight shimmered against the glass walls, softening the sharp edges of the moment. The colonel eased into conversation with Gregory Allen, giving me space but never stepping too far. He had that soldier's gift, knowing when to hold the line and when to dissolve into the scenery. I slipped out through the side doors into the night air. The garden wrapped around the venue like a quiet witness. String lights hung between the branches, their warm glow trembling with the breeze. The scent of pine and rose drifted through the darkness, grounding me. A stone path curved toward a bench, the same bench I'd sat on earlier while tying my shoes unnoticed. I sat again, clasping my hands, feeling the remnants of applause still buzzing under my skin. A crunch of gravel announced him before he spoke. "Elizabeth?" Dad's voice. Not the commanding version, not the judgment-laced one. This voice carried something fragile. I didn't turn. "You can sit," I said. He lowered himself slowly beside me, hands clasped tight, knuckles pale. Neither of us spoke. Crickets filled the gap with their steady percussion, and the garden lights blinked like tiny beacons, trying to help two stranded ships find each other. Finally, Dad said, "I didn't recognize you tonight." "That's because you never tried to," I answered. He flinched, a small intake of breath that told me the truth had punctured deeper than any accusation could. "I deserve that," he murmured. "Probably more." Wind brushed through the pines. A lantern flickered above us. I kept my eyes forward. "Why did you put me behind the pillar?" He swallowed. "Because I didn't want guests asking questions." "About what?" I asked. "About me serving? Or about you ignoring it?" His answer arrived in pieces, carried on a voice stripped of all fatherly authority. I didn't know how to talk about what you did," he said. "Every time you came home, I saw more strength in you than I understood, more courage than I ever had. And it made me feel like I failed as a father, like I had no right to claim pride in something I contributed nothing to." I turned toward him slowly. He stared at the ground. "And instead of facing that, I pushed you away, tried to shrink what intimidated me. I told myself it was for your own good, keeping you closer to home, closer to us. But really, it was my own fear." "Fear of what?" "Fear that I wasn't the parent you needed. Fear that you'd outgrow us. Fear that the world you chose proved mine too small." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I'm sorry for every seat I placed you in that wasn't worthy of you." The garden blurred. I blinked hard and let the night steady me again. "You hurt me," I said. "I know. You made me feel invisible." "I know. You made service, my service, something to hide." He closed his eyes. "I know." Silence carried the weight of everything we hadn't said for a decade. He inhaled, slow and resigned. "But tonight, I saw you. Truly saw you. And I realized I've been looking at the wrong daughter all these years." My breath hitched. "Don't compare us." "I'm not," he said quickly. "Rebecca shines her way. You shine a different way. One I was too blinded by my own pride to understand." He turned toward me then, eyes wet and earnest. "I want to start over, if you'll let me." His words weren't a request for forgiveness. They were a confession wrapped in hope. I studied his face, the lines deepened by years, the rigid jaw softened by truth. He looked older than I remembered, and younger, and more human than he'd ever allowed himself to be in front of me. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. He exhaled shakily. "But we don't get to rewrite the past," I added. "We only write what comes next." He nodded, wiping a stray tear with the back of his hand, embarrassed even in honesty. "That's enough," he whispered. "More than enough." A warm breeze drifted past, carrying the faint echo of laughter from the ballroom. The lights above us swayed like they, too, were relieved. He pushed himself to his feet, slower this time, as if rising under new gravity. "Would you walk back with me?" "In a minute," I said. He nodded again, touching my shoulder gently, the first gentle touch from him in years. "I'm proud of you, Elizabeth. I always should have been." The words entered the night like they were learning to breathe. He walked away, shoulders no longer locked in that unforgiving posture. I watched him go, feeling the tension I'd stored for decades loosen, thread by thread. The colonel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed casually, as if auditing the night for structural integrity. He didn't intrude. He didn't ask. He just tilted his head in a small, precise gesture that meant, "Are you steady?" I nodded. He gave a barely there smile and disappeared back inside. I sat alone for a moment longer, letting the garden wrap its quiet around me. The bench felt different now, not a hiding place, but a pause between truths. For the first time, the seat I had taken wasn't behind anything. It was simply mine. When I finally walked back into the ballroom, the atmosphere had softened into something warmer, less spectacle, more humanity. Music drifted low and patient, the kind that lets people breathe again after a storm. Couples swayed on the dance floor, skirts grazing polished wood, the lights glowing like softened stars. The room no longer felt like a stage I hadn't been invited onto. It felt like a place I could inhabit without apology. Rebecca spotted me first. She excused herself from a cluster of bridesmaids and crossed the dance floor with the hesitant steps of someone wanting to approach gently, like an injured animal she didn't want to scare. "Liz," she said, stopping in front of me. "Can we talk?" I nodded. She motioned toward a quieter corner by the dessert table. Chocolate fountains and sculpted fruit that suddenly felt comical after the gravity of the night. "I didn't realize," she began. "I didn't see how much we'd been smalling you?" Her voice cracked on the last words. "Shrinking," I corrected softly. "The word is shrinking." She nodded vigorously, mascara clinging to her lashes. "Shrinking. God, yes, that's exactly it." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold her own embarrassment in place. "I always thought you were so strong," she said. "Stronger than me, than all of us. I guess I assumed you didn't need the same kind of attention or inclusion." "That's the thing," I said. "Strong people need to be seen too." Rebecca swallowed. "Is there a world where you can forgive me?" "There's a world where we grow," I said. "And tonight is a good start." Tears glossed her eyes again, and she exhaled shakily. "I love you, Liz. I know I don't say it enough." "You say it," I answered. "You just sometimes forget to show it." The honesty didn't wound her. It freed her. She grabbed my hands. "Okay, then I'll show it." And then she did something entirely unexpected. She led me to the dance floor. The DJ switched to a slower track, something elegant and sweeping. The colonel watched from a distance, arms folded, eyes fond in the way commanders look at soldiers who've survived something internal. Rebecca lifted her voice slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, my sister." Heads turned, but not with judgment this time. Curiosity, warmth, even respect, like the room had collectively recalibrated its understanding of me. She raised our joined hands and spun me gently under her arm, and for the first time in our shared life, I didn't feel like the footnote sister. I felt like part of the spine. Mom cried from table 1. Dad watched with a tremor of pride he didn't bother hiding this time. The colonel's chin lifted in approval, a commander acknowledging a victory fought without weapons. When the song ended, Rebecca kissed my cheek. "You're done being hidden," she whispered. "Good," I said. "I hated that pillar." She laughed. "I saw you stuck behind it. I thought it was just logistics." "Nothing in our family is just logistics." She smirked. "Fair." Later that night, I stepped away to catch my breath. The balcony doors opened onto a terrace overlooking the dark hillside. The air was cold enough to remind me of early mornings on base. A scattering of stars blinked like familiar friends checking in. The colonel joined me there, silently, as if pulled by the same instinct. He handed me a fresh glass of sparkling water. "You held yourself well," he said. "So did you." He scoffed. I gave a speech. "You survived years." I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I'm not used to being the center of anything. "You weren't the center tonight," he said. "You were the truth." I didn't respond for a moment. I just let the words settle, smooth, Heavy? Necessary? You know, he added, leaning on the railing, you didn't need me to move that chair. I know, I said, but I'm glad you did. He turned slightly. What will you do next, Captain? I exhaled. No rank now, just Elizabeth. Not to me, he said. The words were simple, but they burned gently through the night. Before the evening ended, Dad approached me again. He wasn't trembling now. He wasn't hiding either. Elizabeth, he said, pausing as if choosing each word with care. I'd like to have you and the Colonel over for dinner next week. A proper dinner. At the house. No pillars. I laughed. An honest, full laugh that surprised both of us. No pillars, I repeated. He nodded, hopeful. We'd like to start again, all of us. I'd like that, I said. And something in his posture broke open, pride bending toward humility, the kind of bend that takes years to earn. As the night wound down, the Colonel offered me his arm escort style, and we walked through the soft aftermath of a wedding that began one way and ended as something else entirely. At the exit, Gregory Allen shook my hand warmly. You changed something tonight, he said. Not just your place in this family, the family itself. I smiled. It was overdue. Change usually is, he replied. Rebecca hugged me again before leaving with her new husband. Mom kissed the top of my head, like she used to when I left for school. Dad squeezed my shoulder without words, but sometimes silence is the apology spoken correctly. The Colonel opened the car door for me, then paused. You know this won't all be fixed overnight, he said gently. I don't need overnight, I replied. I just need honesty. He smiled, the small, dignified kind that said he approved of the world as it currently was, even if just for this moment. Rest well, Captain. Good night, Colonel. He left me with the quiet assurance of someone who would always show up if needed, not to rescue, but to witness. And for the first time in years, I felt not hidden, not half-lit, not behind anything, but finally, unequivocally centered. The wedding ended the way storms do, quietly with everything washed a different shade. Cars hummed away down the gravel drive. Guests scattered into the Colorado night like the last flicker of sparklers. The staff cleared champagne flutes with soft efficiency. The band packed up, but the garden remained. The string lights still glowed. The breeze still slid between the pine branches. And the stone bench, the same one where I sat alone earlier, waited with a patience I didn't yet deserve. I returned to it. The night had cooled, and the air smelled like something clean, almost metallic. Maybe truth has a scent when it's fresh. I lowered myself onto the bench and felt the stone's chill seep through my dress, grounding me. For a moment, I simply breathed. A full breath. Not the shallow ones I trained myself to take when armored in silence. A breath with room in it. I looked at the ballroom behind me, its lights dimmed now, its windows reflecting the garden instead of the crowd. My reflection stared back. No pillar, no shadows, just me in a navy dress that didn't apologize for its simplicity. A soft crunch of footsteps approached. Dad, not rushing, not pacing, just walking, like a man practicing a new rhythm. He stopped beside the bench. Mind if I sit? I shook my head. He lowered himself beside me, elbows on his knees, posture no longer stiff with expectations. You know, he said quietly, that bench has always been here. I never paid attention to it until tonight. You never needed it, I answered. Maybe I did, he said. I just didn't know how to sit in the quiet. We watched a lantern sway from a branch, its warm glow flickering in and out. Elizabeth, he said after a long moment, I want you to know, I heard everything the Colonel said. Every word. Not because he spoke loudly, but because he spoke truth. That was the point, I said. He nodded. I spent your whole life trying to make you fit into our family's idea of success. But tonight I realized you surpassed it long ago. You built something we never taught you, something stronger than accolades. He paused, voice catching on humility. You built yourself. The compliment landed with a gentleness that took the tension out of my spine. I always wanted you to be proud of me, and I admitted, the words raw. I am, he said, turning toward me. I always should have been. Silence spread between us, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was like a blanket on a cold night, meant to comfort, not smother. "Thank you," I said softly. He exhaled. "Thank your colonel, too." "He's not my colonel anymore," I said. Dad smiled, a hint of mischief in it. "He acts like he still is." I allowed a small laugh. "Maybe some people never stop commanding." "Some people never stop caring," he corrected. The garden light flickered across his features, and I saw a man stripped of old convictions, left with truth and the willingness to hold it. "We'll do better," he said. "Your mother and I, for you, for us." "I know," I said. "That's enough." He stood slowly, shoulders far less burdened than they had been. "Come home for dinner next week. First seat at the table." "No pillars?" I teased. "No pillars," he promised. He walked back toward the venue with the gait of someone learning how to be a different kind of father. A better one. I stayed on the bench, letting the night settle its cool hand on my shoulders. Minutes later, a familiar cadence approached. Not hurried. Not tentative, just steady. "Colonel Harlan." He stopped a respectful distance away. "Everything all right here?" "It will be, I said. He nodded once, like he'd received a mission update. "Your father seemed lighter," he noted. "He apologized," I said. "For real this time." "That took courage," he replied. "More than he realizes." I looked at him. "Thank you for tonight." "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "I do." He exhaled, a sound reserved for soldiers finally willing to put down weight. "Elizabeth, you fought the hardest battle tonight, and you didn't lose yourself once." I felt my throat tighten. "You gave me the push I needed." "No," he countered gently. "You walked forward on your own legs. I just removed the obstacle." I smiled at that. The obstacle being the idea that you didn't belong at that table. He stepped closer, eyes steady. "You've always belonged. Your family just needed someone to recalibrate the optics." I laughed, a soft, disbelieving sound. "You always did have a poetic way of delivering military logic." "Poetic?" he scoffed. "Don't insult me." But his smile betrayed him. We stood in the garden's hush as the last guests drifted out, the night holding its breath around us. Finally, he said, "I'll be checking in, not as a colonel, as a friend." "I'd like that," I said. He nodded once, precise, final, and left me under the lights. When I was alone again, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small velvet pouch. The metals inside clinked softly, their metal edges catching the garden glow. I placed one medal on the bench beside me, the one I earned in Ramadi, the one no one at home ever asked about. Tonight, I didn't need the family to ask. Tonight, the family finally knew. I traced the medal's worn engraving with my thumb, then whispered into the cool air, "Sometimes a single ally changes everything." The night accepted the truth without argument. As the lights dimmed and the mountains settled into their dark silhouettes, I stood, casting one last look at the garden bench. No longer a hiding place, but a landmark, the place where I was finally seen. And as I walked toward the exit, a quiet thought settled into me like a new pulse. No pillar can block real dignity. Not anymore. Not ever again. If you've ever felt overlooked or invisible in your own family, subscribe for true stories about hidden strength, forgiveness, and the dignity of being seen.